Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no intention for detaining the House any longer than necessary, so I take your advice on that, particularly as this debate has possibly been the most frustrating debate I have ever sat through in 9 years in this House, Mr. Speaker. I find myself very angry this afternoon, which is not to say that it's not an honour and a pleasure to follow the member for Beaconsfield. Some people, Mr. Speaker, in this House say that the lawyers here don't make very good politicians. I think that the member for Beaconsfield just proved them wrong.
Yes, excellent speech.
I agree with so much of what he said and his analysis of what the Prime Minister has tried to do to this House. But in that, Mr. Speaker, I just want to start on a reflection on a sign that I walked past one of the protesters outside this place holding last week, Mr. Speaker. He was holding a sign that said, "Parliament versus the people." And, Mr. Speaker, isn't that the message that we heard earlier from the dispatch box? Isn't that what was said? Aren't we being told that we are frustrating the will of the British people, Mr. Speaker? Well, I say that way populism lies. If we undermine the ability of members of this House to deliberate, to listen to each other, to form a view, to vote, to decide, to take decisions, I think we open the door to the kind of behaviour that we are seeing right across the developed world at the moment, and it is dangerous, Mr. Speaker. We can believe in democracy and letting people have their say, at the same time as recognising that this House is entitled to express its view, and when it does so, it should be listened to by the executive. And I'll come to that more later. Today's debate has arisen, though, out of frustration because of events overnight, which have been absolutely astounding. The government have decided, as they had to do because the House has not supported their proposal for how to deal with Britain's exiting of the European Union, the government has decided that as we face the deadline that they set for us on Brexit, that now is the time to delay exit day. And we heard from other members that we have received a copy of the Prime Minister's letter to President Tusk during the proceedings of this House. So we find out what's happening from the media, and then we see a copy of the letter during proceedings of this House. I will give way.
Grateful to her for giving way. She will recall that I put that point to the Secretary of State earlier, and he told us that the Prime Minister had put a copy of the letter in the library at 12:10. But I've made inquiry, and it appears that the letter wasn't published online until 1:30 p.m. by the library. So does she agree with me that it's cynical in the extreme to put a copy of the letter in the library when we're all in here for PMQs, and not to actually publish it online where we could look at it until PMQs are over and the Prime Minister has left the House?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable lady for her intervention. I don't say this very often, Mr. Speaker, but thank goodness for Twitter. Because when we were told that the copy of the letter would be in the library, my very able assistant, Holly Higgins, ran across to the library to see if she could get a copy. Meanwhile, I observed on Twitter that journalists had it already. And so, thankfully, we were able to see it nonetheless. But it's cynical, Mr. Speaker. It is totally cynical, as the honourable lady points out. And it's cynical behaviour because, as other members have said very clearly, the government is trying to bully us. They are trying to exert their will and force us to vote for their proposal. And we know this because of what the letter said. the Prime Minister says that she intends to put forward a motion as soon as possible under the Withdrawal Act and make the argument for an orderly withdrawal and a strong future partnership. And she says that if the motion is passed, that she is confident that Parliament will proceed to ratify the deal constructively. But other members have already said at length how convincing the vote against the Prime Minister's proposal has been. We know that this House does not want that proposal. And following the amendments and statements put forward by other members of this House, we know that the House of Commons has voted conclusively no to no deal. So we don't want the government's deal and we don't want no deal, and the government accept that. So therefore, by definition, the government has to change course. It needs to come to this House with a different proposal. And that's also necessary for the government's own stated objective of having a delay, because we know that the European Union do not wish to agree to a delay for no apparent purpose. They want to see a change of course. It is, Mr. Speaker, that simple. Now, I hear what other members have said about proposals to allow this House to express its view in some way, and no doubt that we will do that, because Lord knows, Mr. Speaker, if we've demonstrated anything over the past 2 years, it's that this House is capable of passing amendments if it wishes to. And we will express our view. But we are the legislature, Mr. Speaker, not the executive, and therefore, by simple definition, it is the case that we do not have executive power. So we need the government to commit to changing course. We need them to bring forward proposals of how a different path will be taken. Because something else is true, Mr. Speaker, and that is that the executive is not the legislature. They cannot tell us what to do. They cannot force our hand simply by fiat. We have to hear from the government what their proposals are, and then we have to vote on them, either to accept or to refuse. And in the end, we can make the policies for process and discussion and deliberation as complex as we like, but, Mr. Speaker, it is as simple as that. We now need a change of course from the government that we can deliberate on, that we can vote on, and that we can decide on. We all have a responsibility here to make our political system function as it should. Because if we don't, Mr. Speaker, then it's not just the government that are complicit in opening the door to populism, it's all of us. And I don't say those words lightly. We all know the consequences of getting this wrong. So I simply beg the government to have no more bullying of this House, no more trying to bash us into voting for a deal that we've already voted down absolutely, conclusively and convincingly. Let's have no more of that. Let's have a change of course and a policy that we can support. Because my frustration, Mr. Speaker, this afternoon, and having this debate that's been dominated by reams and reams of words on process that is not about the central issue about if or how we leave the European Union. My frustration, Mr. Speaker, is as nothing to the decisions that are having to be made now, as the Secretary of State knows well, because he's in charge of the no-deal preparations. Our frustration is nothing in comparison to the frustration of individuals, of businesses up and down this country, having to take decisions that they don't want to take because the government is simply unable to plot a course to help our country move on. And I say, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, that people in our country want us to focus on the things that really frustrate them, that really bother them, be it the desperate growth of food banks or the need for all young people in this country to have a proper chance in life. That is what they want us to focus on. So please, Mr. Speaker, I ask the government, change course, make a proposal, let's vote, and then let's move on.